You're going to help me understand perfectionists today.
How am I going to do that?
Why are you
Why
people?
would you say that to me?
Why are you people? You people.
People.
Why
We
are
the
you,
people.
why are you people the way you are? What makes you that way?
Oh, is that the question?
Tongue in cheek, yeah. So I was telling Carrie before we went live here. I was talking to a gentleman, and I won't mention your name. I know you're a listener. I appreciated the conversation. Hopefully, it was helpful. Who seems to be very stuck in a what I called a perfection over progress state, right? And the story here is this gentleman has a validated offer. He sold it effectively. He actually came through one of our entry-level programs called Launchpad a couple of years ago. Sold it effectively, delivered it, and there's a pretty clear direction at this. There's a pretty clear path. Double down on that market, refine your positioning, target that audience, target their pain points, target their challenges, install lead generation systems to attract them. And he's in agreement that that's likely going to open up the floodgates. But I want to make sure my onboarding process is world class, were the words he used. I want to make sure my marketing is really, really effective. The videos that we create, the marketing content is top notch, professional. I want to make sure our results mechanism, our offer, is buttoned up. I want to make sure I have all these things really clearly nailed down, buttoned up, world class before we open the floodgates. You know people like this, Carrie?
Never met them. Never.
And I don't.
I feel like I'm being outed on this
we
podcast.
had a little bit of time for me to address this at the end of our conversation, and I don't think I addressed it effectively. So this is now my way of addressing it to the gentleman in question, and anybody, frankly, who finds themselves in a similar position. It's not uncommon. We know that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because to me, as you know, I do think perfection is something to chase at times. So what I find that's interesting about this is the timing around, quote unquote, perfection or getting it right or whatever the case may be. And I say that because having a long-term goal of having those things in place, right? Of having this world-class onboarding, of having everything running like a well-oiled machine, of having everything in place and having this confidence in your delivery. I think that's a great goal to have. What I think the big problem is people try to deploy their perfectionism at exactly the wrong time. And so trying to make something perfect this early on before A, you don't even know if you need it, and B, quite frankly, you don't know what exactly you need, is a recipe for having to redo the whole thing over again. And I say that because the way to improve, and maybe this is just how I've started to get past my own perfectionism, it's innately within me. The way to improve is to have information and trying to get everything right before you start to do the work. In other words, before you get the information means that you're chasing something that you really don't know how to get to. If you haven't worked with enough clients to understand what your world-class program should look like, then all you're really doing is the other thing that often plagues perfectionists, right? Which is protecting yourself from doing something that might feel imperfect with an excuse that sounds plausible, when the reality is you're not in a position at this moment, at least from what you're telling me about this person, who I don't know, you're not in a position at this moment to get to world class, to get to perfectionism.
It strikes me as a very sophisticated rationalization.
Huh?
That at face value, like if I just listen to the words at face value, well, our onboarding's got to be world class, and the mechanism, the solutions got to be really buttoned up. Like at face value, those sound like reasonable things to say. Well, yeah, sure, yeah, you got to have a good offer, and you got to have a good product. You got to know what you like. It's very agreeable at face value, particularly to smart, intelligent people. The problem is it's in direct contradiction to how business works and how products and solutions are developed. If any of you have actually participated or purchased a product or a service or a solution in beta, like an MVP, minimum viable product, like the first iteration of a product or solution, you will know it was likely clunky, it was messy, it had bugs. And I don't mean like a software product, I mean anything. Like it was probably highly imperfect. And through your feedback and through iteration and through exposure and interaction with the marketplace, if it lasted, often they don't, right? But if they lasted, they managed to refine that to a place where, frankly, it was never perfect, but good enough to be compelling. And one of the things I shared with this gentleman was, I don't think anything that we do is perfect. 10 years later, well, whatever, 10 some odd years later, over 1,000 clients later, I can look at our marketing and I could make a laundry list of things I hate about it. I can look at this podcast and make a laundry list of things that we should improve. I can look at our solution and make like all these things could be improved. But what they are right now is effective. They're not perfect, but they're effective. They do their job. And I just worry about folks that have these kind of perfectionist tendencies. And we've dealt with a lot of them in the program and helped them kind of rein it in. Because in my experience in business, which I don't think is unique by any means, like the way to break through the initial ceiling and get traction is to rein in those tendencies and just get it done and deliver on, frankly, what's probably going to be a messy, imperfect product and experience in the beginning, and then improve and iterate from there.
Yeah. And you use the words rein in as if it's a simple thing, right? Because I think it is a simpler thing for you than some of the folks we're talking about for a lot of reasons. And I think it's worth talking about some of the mental work that you need to go through to be able to rein it in, because someone telling you just to rein it in is kind of like, calm down. It's not likely to do the trick. And all you do is, again, because you're an intelligent human being, you're just going to shore up your argument, right? Well, this is why it's important. These are all the bad things that could happen if I don't make it perfect. These are all the terrible consequences that are in my future if I don't go down this path of, refining and getting things really tightened up. And there are a few things that are helpful to me. And I think let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's been helpful with some of our clients, because the solution to this is going to be different for different people. But, the one statement I want to make, and I think you're kind of leading there when you talk about the business that we're working in today, is perfectionism doesn't exist anyways, right? You can spend all of your time trying to perfect the thing, trying to make it exactly the way that you feel it needs to be. And I shouldn't say it doesn't exist. It may exist for a brief, shiny, fleeting moment. And then it will not be perfect anymore because something's going to change, right? Something's going to change around you. You're going to change. Your client's going to change. Something will be different. And what was, or at least felt perfect, that won't be the case anymore. So I think one of the first things to let go of is this notion that you can create something that is perfect. And then the second thing, as I said before, is letting go of the notion that you know enough to be able to create the thing that's as close to perfection as possible now. And then the third thing I would say is you've got to be so clear on what it is you're trying to do, right? Why are you going down this path? If your goal is to be able to perfectly deliver something to nobody, then great. You may be on the right path, right? If your goal is to actually work with people and move them forward and give them what they need, then that's a different story. And a lot of this comes from you deciding what perfect is, right? You deciding what value is versus being clear on what your clients decide what value is. Because you having the perfect onboarding is not likely to be the thing that the client remembers when they finished working with you, right? They are going to remember that you got them to the place they didn't think they could go. And so there's also something to be said about understanding, what does perfection really mean? And not just what it really means in terms of a definition, but what does it mean to the people who are actually taking part in the activity that you're working on? It's a lot of words, but I have a lot to say about perfectionism.
Yeah, and that's why I'm keenly interested in having this conversation with you, because I know you ascribe certain perfectionist tendencies to yourself, and at the same time, we work together in what is a very small, scrappy organization where nothing's really perfect, and you thrive in that environment. So that's why I'm keen to get your perspective here. I think it's worth noting, to your point, we have graduated over 1,000 clients at this stage, and we give a damn about our solution. Like we are constantly improving and refining our solution. We've had over 1,000 kicks at the can and a ton of data and a ton of feedback, and we're not resting on our laurels. We constantly review that feedback, review that data, and make improvements. And the program's been through several, and we're probably on 8.0 if we were tracking it in that kind of sense at this stage, right? And it ain't perfect.
Actually, no, I'm going to contradict you there.
As director of client success, actually, hold on a second.
But I want to go back because I think it depends what you mean by perfect. And this is the thing that gets really complex, right? Because if I asked you to define what would be a perfect client experience, if I asked you to define what would be a perfect podcast, you'd give me a definition. You would describe it to me. If I then went and asked 5 clients what the perfect client experience was, and I asked 5 listeners what the perfect podcast was, also different responses, right? And so I just think it's a critical thing to start to try to wrap your head around. I think we can all do it intellectually, but to be able to do it emotionally is trickier. But just understanding that I don't know that we can make it perfect. We can make it perfect for us. That may be a problem when it comes to the clients who come through the doors, right? We can make it perfect for a client, and that's going to be a problem for, other clients, for the folks that work here, for any other stakeholders that are involved.
And I gotta say, I think that's where humility becomes really important, because to your point, you're right. The only way for us to conclude that it's perfect would be to make it perfect in alignment with our definition of perfect. But we don't write the checks, and we're not the customer. And what's perfect for one customer might not be perfect for another, right? So it's almost like chasing our definition of perfectionism is kind of arrogant, right? And missing the point as to who this is actually all about and for, which is the clients and the people that we serve. And there is no achieving perfection for the market at large, because the market is diverse. So what do? I think what you chase is better, not perfect. Could it be better? Yeah. Should we pursue better? Yeah. Are we committed to better? Yeah. It is ever going to be perfect for everybody at all times, in all situations, for, from all walks of life? Probably not.
And let's also talk for a minute about why people get into this perfectionist mindset. And I'm not going to go into sort of the different paths by which we land here, right? But in the end, perfectionism.
What happened to you as a child, Karen? When did you first develop this? No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, we don't have enough time. What is true, though, about perfectionism and procrastination, because those two things go hand in hand, right? And it sounds like, again, didn't talk to the person, but the gentleman you were speaking with, they're both things are happening, right? Your perfectionism is your excuse for your procrastination. And both of those things are happening most often because of fear. Do I really care that I'm putting out a perfect product? Maybe, but it's also possible / probable that what I really am afraid of is putting out something that someone else sees a fault in. And so I'm going to, do all these mental gymnastics to convince myself that just sitting in the corner at my desk and working on it more is doing something and is somehow getting me closer. But, in the end, what I'm doing is protecting myself from going out in the world. I don't want to put out any content until it's the perfect content. I don't want to get a client until I know exactly how I'm going to deal with them every step of the way. You're 100% right. It's going to keep you from being critiqued or criticized or hearing from someone with a different opinion. Also, you're just going to be spending your life sitting alone at your desk, trying to make it better and better.
I've often said to both of our internal team and to our client group that I have found over the course of business, as a general rule of thumb, what's been bad for my ego has been good for business.
Agreed.
And countless examples of this, right? Whether it's, publishing to start with. Publishing was hard on my ego because I didn't like my own content. I would judge and criticize and then feel bad about myself. And guess what? It was great for business. Continues to be. This podcast, I'm an avid listener of this podcast, and I'm constantly like, why did I say it that way? Why do I mumble sometimes? Why this, why that, right? Like actively criticizing myself. And guess what? This podcast is great for business. When it comes to fulfillment, enrollment, there's so many examples of where I had to be humbled and do the thing anyways. That ended up being fantastic for the business. And so, to your point, for those of you who are, new-ish to business, early stages, I kind of the harsh truth here, but the truth nonetheless is, if you want to succeed in business, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. You're going to have to expose yourself to criticism. I mean, one of the things I mentioned to this gentleman was, yeah, I can pretty much guarantee you your first 10 clients, one of them is going to hate you. Not hate you. I mean, that's a strong word, right? But like one of them's going to be like, at the very least, mildly dissatisfied because you're just starting. It's not going to be perfect out of the gate. I can guarantee you're going to have an unhappy, dissatisfied client in that first group and in the next group too. But my point is, it's going to come early. And you got to be ready for that. Like you've got to be mentally prepared to be criticized, to be judged, to be attacked. And hopefully it doesn't come at you in ways that are debilitating, right? But it's not going to be all like people have this fantasy where, I put up a LinkedIn post. Here's the fantasy, right? I put up a LinkedIn post. Everybody DMs me asking for my calendar link. They book an appointment. They fawn over how intelligent and how smart I am in the conversation. Then they throw money at me. And then I do this amazing work and they applaud me in the boardroom with a standing ovation until the next project. And you know what happens? Don't get me wrong, but it's not the norm, right? The reality of selling and delivering consulting services is a little bit more thorny than that. Still fulfilling, still worth doing, still has an impact on your clients, still rewarding for you, but not necessarily comfortable in the process.
Mm-hmm. And something I think you're getting at as well when you talk about what's bad for my ego is good for the business is that, especially when you're starting out, especially when you're on your own, or even if you've got some people working with you, but you are still the face at the front of the business, it's really hard to separate your business from yourself. And if you can, work your way through finding a way to do that, then this is going to be a lot easier. Because when someone criticizes how something happened or doesn't like the way, the engagement went or, whatever the case may be, being able to be outside of that and debrief it and figure out what went well and what went wrong and what you can improve next time is much easier if you don't feel it inside your gut as a personal, attack or critique of you. And often it's phrased that way, right? Because you are the business. but finding a way to understand, who you are as a person, what you stand for, all of these great things that we know how much you care about your clients. We know how much you want to do a great job. We know what kind of an expert you are. If you can get really firm in that and then take the things that people see, whether that is the content you're putting out, whether that is, the way that you're onboarding somebody, whatever the case may be, and see that as an operational issue, right? Something to be resolved. That's a way that you can sometimes hack getting through this and quite frankly, kind of not wasting the time that you will waste going down the perfection spiral otherwise.
So I think that's a really interesting, response to perfectionism. If I think about our business, there was a point in time where I was doing everything. I was doing the marketing, I was doing the sales, I was doing the client delivery. And then you came in and you first and foremost, I believe, extricated me from client delivery. And I was still involved, but you pulled me out a little bit. And we brought in coaches to help support clients who were specialists in each of the different subject matter areas that we cover. And if you recall, my initial feeling on it was, all right, let's do it because we need to do it to grow the business. But come on, Carrie, they're not going to be as good as me, right? Like between you and me, like, come on. We're compromising here on the client experience, right? And you were like, okay, sure, let's see, right? You're like, let's, okay, Mr. Ego, like just watch. And of course, what happens is we hired a team of coaches who within their particular domains are far more experienced and have more expertise than I do. And that elevated the entire client experience and then taught me an invaluable lesson, which was I can't be world-class at everything. I can't, and I was relatively good at all the things, but I wasn't world-class at all of them. There's a smaller set of activities that I'm truly world-class at, and bringing on other people enabled me to focus on those activities. So the point I'm making here is, if you're trying to build the perfect business, that would require you, if it's just you, to be world-class at all the things the business requires. The marketing and the selling and the delivery and the administration. And I mean, no disrespect, but you're not. There's no chance you're world-class at all those things. And could you aspire to get to a place where you can bring on people who are world-class in the things that you're not world-class at so you can focus on what you're truly world-class at? Absolutely. And maybe you get a little bit closer to perfection at that stage, but not anytime sooner.
Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace.